before we go into what you then do with it, which I'm going to do in the build-up up to the break, is I did want to talk a little bit about two other thoughts on collecting customer understanding and superior insight. And they come down to how you collect them. And two thoughts. Thought number one, again, lesson of learning, bit we've learned from other places. You want to find out about your customer, okay? You have a list of questions. I've just given you a list of questions there. You have your own questions, you have your market research surveys, you have maybe it's an interview guide if it's a customer coming into the branch or whatever, and you want to have a conversation. Every time you write an interview guide, or a questionnaire, or a list of questions, what have you done? You have put a boundary around the insights that you're going to find. Because you've decided in advance what you're looking for. You've already decided it because you've got your list of questions. When you do that, you will get some really good information. But what will you miss because you've decided to put a boundary around it? And what a lot of organisations are finding is that sometimes it makes sense at the beginning to go in with a blank sheet of paper. Sometimes, as well as doing all the questionnaires and interviews, sometimes just go in and observe your customer's world without an agenda. Just watch, and who knows what you're going to see. And I know companies that do this. I know there's a big opticians chain in the UK where once a month they take the manager of the branch in the main street and he stands on the other side of the road with a blank sheet of paper and he just watches what's happening. And he writes everything he sees down for an hour or two. And then he comes in and he sits down with his staff and they discuss it. Why did that happen? What do we think was going on? What was in their head? And you learn lots by doing it. Blank sheet of paper, really, really important. Give an example. This is a newspaper in Scotland, in my country, okay? The day after, there had been a big discussion, a big debate on the television between the main political leaders, okay? Cam there is David Cameron, the man who is now the Prime Minister in the UK. David Cameron, and they call him Cam, this newspaper. Cam's telly flop number 2. David Cameron had clearly had a bad night on the television the night before, okay? He'd done a bad job in the debate, clearly. If, however, you went to my local newsagent store where you buy the newspapers in Edinburgh, and on the same shelf as that, you were to pick up the newspaper that was right next door to that one, this is what you would have seen. Cameron wins with passion. So what have you got? Two journalists who watched exactly the same television programme but came to completely opposite conclusions. Why? Because they went in with an agenda. The Daily Record does not like David Cameron. They were going to look for everything he did wrong, and that's what they were going to see. The Daily Express does like David Cameron, so they were going to look for everything he did right. And they would almost screen out the bits they didn't like. That's what we do with customers if we're not careful. When we go in with an agenda, when we go in the questionnaire. So sometimes, if you really want to break through, it makes sense to go in just with the blank sheet sometimes, because that can really help you just look at it a different way. I find it catches up with me once a year, this particular problem, because once a year there is a big rugby fixture, which is a sport I'm particularly interested in, and it's England versus Scotland. And usually I have a job in England the week after the match. And usually we've lost. And usually I have to get into a coffee cup, of course they want to discuss it with me when I get down there. And it's amazing how what I think was a very unlucky, unfortunate loss, if we'd had a decent referee, we probably would have won the game. For them was a complete thrashing, and we were never even in the game, and they should have beaten us by even more points. Yeah. Again, because we're going with a pair of glasses that sees it the way we want to. So, blank sheet of paper is number one. The other one that I find quite interesting, particularly for a senior team like yourselves, is this. Don't forget that as you get more senior in your organisation, you get a bit further away from the customer, don't you? It just naturally happens. You're managing people, you've got other jobs to do. But at the same time, you are now the most important you've ever been. So your decision influence is even bigger than it's ever been. So you put the two together, and at the time in your career, when you're the most important you've ever been, and making the biggest decisions you've ever made, you're potentially further from the consumer, or the customer, than you've ever been. That's potentially dangerous. And therefore, what I would say to you is, when you think about customer insight and understanding the customers, okay, don't forget that it's almost as important to have good ways of sharing the insights through the organisation as it is to have the insight in the first place. I know lots of organisations where they've got fantastic customer insight, but it's not getting to the right people. Two thoughts on that. First of all, the way you share it. Eurostar, on a Monday morning at the executive meeting, I would get the customer satisfaction data. And what I would get would be a graph. And it would tell me, you know, customer satisfaction has gone up or gone down by half a share point last week. What am I going to do with that? I mean, it's nice to know, but what am I going to change because of it? It's much better if somebody comes to me and tells me some stories. Here's what we did well last week. Here's what we didn't do well last week. Here's some thoughts about what we could do better in the future. You know, that's the kind of thing I want to hear. I want to hear stories. I remember once I was trying to persuade my senior executives at Procter & Gamble to implement a particular test kit that I had for a product. It was the only way I could prove that this product was superior to customers, was to give them a little test kit to take home and try it for themselves. And I couldn't get the money to do it because it was going to cost something like £500,000, and in 1984 that was a lot of money, and you know, you'd have to really show that it worked, and we couldn't show it worked. So what I did was I recruited 6 people who used to buy the rival product. And I thought, this is a toilet cleaner story, but I'm deliberately being sensitive and keeping the word toilet out of it, okay? I gave them a test kit, 6 people who would normally buy the rival product, gave them the test kit and a bottle of my product, and I said, go home and try this. They tried it. I got on the phone to them afterwards. I said, what did you think? Did it work? Now, you know how on the television advertising sometimes you see somebody that comes up and says, I wouldn't have believed it until I saw it for myself. And you wonder, how much are they paying them to say that? You know? These ladies really said it. I couldn't believe it. They were saying, I was amazed. This thing, it really worked. You proved it to me. So what I did was I made a little version of the tape recording, because I'd recorded them on the phone, and I made a 2-minute version. And the next time I went to the senior management meeting, and we were talking about it, and they said, what are you doing to turn around your brand? I said, well, look, I really want to do the test kit. And they said, yeah, we've heard about it, but you know, it's expensive. I said, can I have 2 minutes of your time? I put the tape recorder on the desk, I pushed play. 2 minutes later, I had my money. They gave me the money. Because the senior people had listened to real customers talking about it. They weren't just looking at graphs and numbers, they were hearing about real stories. So I would argue, if you want to persuade your senior management to do something about the customers or to share customer information and insight with them, tell them stories. Bring the customer to life for them. The reason you believe in the customer insight is because you've seen it. So you need to make sure the people you need to influence see it as well. Don't just give them numbers and graphs. It's not enough. And it does make a difference. I mean, you see it in lots of places. Right, as I say, I live in Scotland. I travel a lot, okay? And one of the downsides, I should say, one of the slight, very small problems of working with our very good friends and neighbours down in England is that they tend to organise meetings in London at 9 o'clock in the morning and forget that I live in Edinburgh. As a result, me and many other Scottish business people have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 in the morning and make your way to the airport and get on the early shuttle, the red eye as they call it. Your red eyes are red from it. And it's 6 o'clock flight. It's horrible. We hate doing it, okay? But we get used to it. And in getting used to it, there's one fine art that you develop. The art of sleeping while sitting up on an aeroplane, okay? And you know how to do it. And you know, before that aeroplane even pushes back from the gate, you are sound asleep, okay? You're absolutely sound asleep. And it's brilliant. Right, that's part of the story. The other part of the story is that British Airways went through a big cost-cutting campaign a few years ago. And there used to be a pilot base in Edinburgh. And the pilots that lived in Edinburgh would always be the pilot on that first flight, always, because they live in Edinburgh and it's safe. They changed that about 2 years ago. And they changed it so that now the pilots could come from anywhere and they've stayed in a hotel for the night and they've been. So they don't know about the Scottish business traveller. So what happens now is you get on board the aeroplane at 6 o'clock, and before it pushes back, you're sound asleep. There's 150 snoring business people all the way up and down the plane, fast asleep, catching up on that last hour. And it's wonderful for 20 minutes. And halfway through the flight, which is about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, what happens? Ding dong! This is your co-pilot speaking. Just to give you an update on our progress, we are now at 34,000 feet above Manchester. It's raining in London and we should be arriving on about on time. I do hope you enjoy the rest of your flight. Well, I was enjoying it till you woke me up. And you see all these people sort of going, what's going on? Again, it's a silly little thing, isn't it? But it makes a difference. The pilots, when they were Edinburgh-based, knew not to do that because they flew this every morning, they know their customer. The new pilots don't know their customer. For them, they're reading a manual which you would use on long-haul flights that says, reassure passengers on a regular basis. You know, not on this flight, please. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story, actually, about that one, because